Hey guys, what's going on? In this tutorial we are going to learn about how to get started with Adobe Photoshop CC or earlier. If you are a beginner, this tutorial should be very helpful. So getting started guys, what we're going to do is we're just going to simply drag an image into Photoshop right here. I do have an image on my desktop which I'm going to just click and drag. If you're on PC, I don't think this might not actually be possible, so you're going to have to open up your folder and drag it in like so. Okay, so that's just if you're on PC. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to easily resize an image, and the way that you do that is if you're on Mac, you would use Command Alt and I. However, if you're on PC, you're going to have to use Control Alt and I. This brings up this image size box which shows us the size of the image. At the moment it's 1280 by 800. The resolution is 72 pixels per square inch, and at the moment this little, let's say this little paperclip symbol has not been selected. So if you were to change the width to, let's say, 500, then the height is not going to scale down proportionately with the width, and you're going to get this, you see this preview here, the image is all distorted. That's not what you want. So if you just make sure that, let's just undo that real quick with Command Z or Control Z, and if we click on this little paperclip symbol, whatever you call it, and change the width down to 600, the height will scale down proportionally with it. You press OK, and you can see that it's not squished up, it's not really tall or really long, it's just how it should scale down. Now, a handy little technique that you can do to zoom into an image is by holding down the Alt key, and if you have a scroll on your mouse, you can just scroll on that and it will zoom you in and zoom you back out. And if you see in the bottom left corner where it says the percentage, at the moment mine says 80.26%. If I want to get back to how the image would look once I actually produce it, like the actual pixel dimension of it, I can do a Command 1 or Control 1, and it brings the artboard back to 100%. Next up guys, we are going to look into how to change the brightness of an image, how to change its color corrections, for example its hue and things like that. But before we get into that, we're actually going to look at how to easily crop an image. And the way that you can do this is simple enough. You can either go over here to this crop symbol, it should be the fourth symbol down in your toolbar over here. If you cannot see your toolbar, you're going to want to go to Window and then Tools, and then your toolbar should show somewhere on the left hand side. But mine is already there, so we can go ahead. We can either click the symbol and it brings these handy proportions around, and we can change what part of the image we want to show. We can do it that way, and then we can click enter, or let me just undo that with Control Z or Command Z. Or what you can do, a quicker way, is you can simply just press the C key on your keyboard, and it's just quicker, it gets you to that crop tool much quicker. So let's crop this image. And there we go, we have a cropped image, not very well cropped, but you get the idea. So we're back to square one, we have the image here again. What we're going to do now is we are going, let me just close this image, and I'm going to reload it back in so it's back at full resolution, so you can see it a bit more clearer on the screen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look into brightness and contrast, and the way that you can do this is you go to Image at the top, Adjustments, and then Brightness/Contrast. It will bring up this very handy little box where you can easily, if you make sure you have the preview box here ticked, because otherwise when you make changes you won't see any changes made to the image. But if you click that preview box, you will see them change. You see that it's changed instantly. So the brightness by default is set to 0 and the contrast is set to 0. But if we increase the contrast at the bottom, you can see that making its change. And you can do the same with the brightness. Lower it. I think that might actually look a little bit better than it did before. But yeah, that's quite a nice way of color correcting an image just with brightness and contrast, just to make an image look a little bit sharper or a bit prettier. Although it is good to remember that, let me just bring that back up again. It is good to remember that once you do make one change, once you go back into brightness and contrast again, those effects are still going to be applied to the image. So if you were to add more contrast, you can notice that if we go into like the 50s, 60s, even the 40s and 30s, it applies too much contrast and it doesn't look very nice at all. So just remember that if you're going to add on some more brightness and contrast, again, like you want to alter it a little bit, make sure that you Command Alt and Z or Control Alt and Z to undo to get back to the original image before reapplying. Next up, we're going to look at how you can change the image's colors using the hue effect. So the way that you can do that is you go to Image at the top and down to Adjustments and then Hue/Saturation. And in here, just like how on the brightness and saturation panel, you can indeed do the same in the saturation segment here, making it brighter and redder, and all the oranges and reds come out a bit thicker for you. But there is something else that you can do, which I really like, and that is changing the hue of the image. This can sometimes be very handy. For example, if I wanted to make it more bluey and greeny, then I would just go this way and it will add more blue and green sort of tones into the image. But what you need to remember is that it's not going straight to blue and green. What it's doing is it's mixing the blue and green with the colors that are already in the photo. So blue and orange and green, and it's turning into more of a pink sort of shade. Now it's gone purple, and you can really mess around with the hue to get any sort of color you like. You see now that's just changed to like a yellowy golden brown effect. Let's click OK on that and Command Alt Z or Control Z, and you'll see the difference. So changing the hue of an image can be useful. I don't tend to use it that often. I tend to use brightness and contrast a lot of the time though, so that there are some easy and quick image edits that you can do. Moving on. There are also other effects that you can apply to an image inside Photoshop, and if you can easily find these by going to Filter at the top, and they're all here. So you have Stylize, Emboss, Fuse, Extrude, you have Pixelate in it. You can get like a nice sort of mosaic effect. If I show you that mosaic, see, it probably not the best example to use this photo, but if you increase the cell size, you can see that it's giving you this pretty cool mosaic effect. There are other ones that you can do. Let's go back into it. Blur, I use that quite a lot. If you go blur and then to Gaussian blur, you can change how blurry the image is. Surprisingly, eh? So yeah, that can be useful. I sometimes use that if I'm making a certain part of the image blurrier than the other part, so something comes more into focus. So next up, guys, why don't we look into how we can use text within Adobe Photoshop. Just like every tutorial you'll see on YouTube, this will come up, so why not include it? It's good to learn. So to do this, the quickest way to do it is just by pressing the T symbol on your keyboard, and that will take you straight to the type tool. If you click on your image wherever it may be, and let's just type write test in all capitals, and if you highlight it, and then you can change the size of it up here by just clicking and dragging like so, or you can use the drop down to choose a height that you want, 72, or let's just go big so you can all see it. You can also change, make sure you've got it highlighted when you do this. You can also change the color by clicking up here, and you can change the color to whatever you may like. So I'm going to change it to just like a green, just so it stands out for this tutorial, as disgusting as it looks against that photo. What you can also do is if you press the selection tool at the top left corner and make sure that you have auto select and change this to layer selected, make sure this is ticked up here, you can then move the text around to wherever you see fit. And the good thing about Photoshop is the fact that it snaps to the middle. You see that? Those pink lines that come up, they're called guides. When they come up, it snaps to the middle. Very useful. There we go. And you can also change the font. So if we press T again, then highlight the text, and I've got it set to this nice Proxima bold, which I might put a link in the description. If not, you can just Google it and you can find it yourself. But if you just click in the center of the text panel up here, and then use your arrow keys on your keyboard up and down, you can easily, quickly change what font you have on, just like so. Or let's highlight again. You can type in the let me just get out of here. But you can just click up here, and I want, for example, let's say if I wanted to get back to Proxima Nova, or let's say if I wanted to use Arial, I can just type ARIAL, and you see that it comes up with all of the fonts that are closest match to the search term Arial. So let's go with Arial Bold. So there you go, that's how you do your basic text. What we're going to go into now, guys, is how we can add a nice sort of drop shadow, 3D-ish sort of effect to the text. Very simple way of doing this. All you need to do is go back on your selection tool, click on the layer is down here. Now if you double click on this layer, it will come up with the layer styles. So these are pretty cool styles that you can apply to your text to give it different effects. So bevel and emboss gives this sort of fridge magnet effect, and you can change the size, you can soften it, change the depth of the shadow on the text, so you see that. But what we're going to go for is we're going to click on drop shadow at the bottom here, and you can see automatically that it's applied this slight drop shadow effect behind the text. If we increase the spread, which is basically how much the shadow gets dispersed, and if we change the size, the size is how far the shadow gets dispersed off of the text, whereas the spread is how dark the shadow is. So you can see that. So we're going to go for a light spread, lightish spread. The size, we're going to bring that down to 29, and then the distance is basically how far away the shadow is from the text. So you can see if you bring it all the way to the top, it basically goes off the screen, it goes all the way over there, you see. But we're going to bring that back, and we're going to put it just behind the text. What I actually want to do is I want to make sure that the shadow, just for this example, isn't so far away from the text. So at the moment it seems like it's a very light shadow, like as if it isn't set down on the photo. So the way that I can do this is if I bring the spread down and bring the size down, you can see now that it seems a lot closer. What we can do to actually make this, click OK, we're going to go back into the text tool and highlight it. So make it more obvious, more visible. I'm just going to change the text to white, and I think you can probably see it a little bit better now. You see that shadow around the edges. So yeah, that's how you add a basic drop shadow to text. You can also do that to shapes as well. You can do shapes in Photoshop, and the way that you do that is you can just go over here to this circle symbol. If you hold down on it, you can change to, keep holding whatever symbol you like. So let's just go with rectangle. Now that we've got the rectangle selected, we're going to click and drag, and you can see that I'm making this rectangular shape. And if I hold down Shift, I can constrain it so that it remains perfect square. But if I hold down Alt as well, it remains the perfect square, but it increases all the sides at the same time. So let me let go. There's our shape. and make sure that if you want to change the color of the shape, you're going to need to that was the worst grammar of all time. You're going to need to click back on the rectangular shape and change the fill up here. Let's change it to, well, let's just change it to blue. And you can also change the stroke, which is basically the amount of color around the sides. So let's change that to this green color, and we can put it all the way up to 16.91. So now that we have this just ugly shape, I would never choose blue and green as colors to go for, but now that we have this shape here, we're going to go and add a drop shadow to it, and it's the same method as before. Unfortunately, there's not a quick way of just mimicking the same shadow that we have on this text up here. You can actually do that in Illustrator. You'll see that in my other tutorial. If you check the description to this video, you will be able to click through to see my Illustrator tutorial, which is would be very handy for you to know both programs. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the rectangle layer down here, and again we're going to click on drop shadow, and we can just play around with these sliders here to get the shadow that we're looking for. So you can just do whatever you like, but what I actually forgot to mention is that you can change the angle here, which is basically where the shadow is. The thing about this though, I don't know if you can notice, but as I'm changing the shadow on this shape, it's also changing the shadow on the text at the top, which is a bit annoying, but I haven't found a workaround around this. If you have, leave a comment below. If you're a fellow designer, that would be helpful. And there's another thing you can do, is you can change the opacity of the shadow, which is actually very useful. I forgot to mention that. It basically shows you how dark the shadow is itself. So if you have it all the way up, it's going to be the darkest. You can also change the color of the shadow. Another thing that I forgot to mention, by double clicking this color palette here, and you can change it to whatever color you like. So if you change it to red, it actually looks a little bit better because it blends in with the background. But yeah, that's that, guys. Let's have another look at something that's very useful. I go over this in my Illustrator tutorial, but this is a very handy technique to know of. It's how to duplicate items on your artboard. So for example, if I wanted to duplicate test or the shape, both ways that I can do this is I can click on the layer, hold down the Alt key, and you'll see that it'll come up with this duplication sort of icon, and then you just basically click and drag. And what Photoshop does is it constrains it, so you don't even have to hold down shift. I mean, if you did hold down shift, it constrains it even more for you so that it won't move. But luckily Photoshop gives you these handy guides, so you can just copy and let go, and there you go. Now you have two tests. This is useful if you don't want to have to go and create a new text layer and redo this same shadow effect again. So you can just go back, you can just press T, and you can edit the text to, let's say, that horrible word, test exam. Okay, what a horrible word. Okay, and you can do whatever you like with this text. You can change its color just like we did before. You can change its size. You can do whatever you like. What I'm going to do now, guys, is I'm basically just going to show you how to export or save an image that you've created. And let's just get rid of this shape. What we're going to do is I'm just going to click first on the test layer, and I'm going to hold down shift and click on the exam layer, and I'm just going to click and drag, and this is how you select two items at a time. Let's put them in the middle. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to save the image to our desktop. So first of all, if you want to go back into this file at a later date and change the color of the text, or you want to change the background image, you're going to have to save it as a Photoshop file to be able to do this, to be able to go back in the future. So you go File and then Save As, and it will say format, and it should say Photoshop, and then you can just name it whatever you like. So I'm just going to name mine example.psd, and make sure you keep this extension on the end when you type out a name, because it's important that it saves it as this is a Photoshop document, and that's what it stands for. And then you click save. And if I just show you my desktop, you can notice that over here, this file here, this is in fact this file. So that's all good, that's saved. Now we want to save it as a JPEG or a PNG. If the image didn't have a background, you'd want to save it as a PNG file, so that still keeps its transparent background. But we have a background to this image, so we can save it as a PNG, or we can save it as a JPEG. It doesn't matter, it's still going to look the same. So we can go File and Save As, and I'm going to save it to our desktop again, but we're going to change format, and we're going to select JPEG. Save. Here you can choose how good the quality of the file is. Anything from 8 up to 12 is good quality. Obviously 12 is the best pixel quality that you can get. But if you're uploading this to the internet, onto a website for example, you wouldn't really want a 528.6K, that's half a megabyte image on your website, because it'd slow it down. So I would put it down to like 8, and you see that brings it down to 206 kilobytes, which is much better for web use. But let's just go with 12, because I'm not thinking about using this anywhere really. But anyway, for example, we're having it on 12 and we're pressing OK, and there is my image. So I have this image here. Let me open it up. There's my image, but I also have my Photoshop file, which if I were to double click, it would bring up my Photoshop document right here, and all my layers would be saved. So guys, I hope that this tutorial was useful. I hope you learned something from it. If the video was helpful, subscribe, leave a like, comment if you have any questions, and peace.